All right, the countdown begins.
Hello, welcome everybody. Happy New Year. Hope you had a good Christmas. What is it, the 4th of January? Hope you had a good New Year. Getting a bit old now, so I wasn't up all night. I stayed up for the fireworks, but I was up again early, as was a lot of people, to watch a certain finale of a certain season of a certain series. The image behind should give you a good clue of what that is. Spoilers, by the way. I've done a couple of shorts on this already. Spoilers all over this. Nothing but spoilers. If you have not seen the last episode of the last season of Stranger Things and are going to, watch that first. If you can, watch the stage play as well, because it gives some credence to something that happens within the last episode, which was hinted on in a slip of the tongue by Noah during an interview, which he was quickly reprimanded for by Millie. Excuse me, I still have a cough from a month ago. I blame Max. But back to business. So obviously with Stranger Things, there's a lot of debate, speculation about the fate of Eleven, Elle, Jane, Millie Bobby Brown, Millie Bonnie Bon Jovi, whatever the hell her name is these days. So I've made a few notes. Now, my first little short was about the number of waterfalls. I said there were only two, meaning that Mike's version of what happened with Eleven and what actually happened were two different things. However, the start of the clip at the end, there was a third waterfall, or first waterfall, and then she sees the last two. However, I then went back on yesterday morning when I was over at the house and put across my second theory, was that the illusion of Eleven, as posited by Mike, was being sustained by Carly. Now I'm back at my home rig, and I've got my setup, I've got my editing software. I can throw the footage and the images in. Hopefully I won't bore you too long. I've literally written things down as I've remembered them. So it might be a bit back and forth, up and down, left and right, wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. So let's just dig straight in. So the issue is, there are two different versions of what happens at the end. The witnessed version is that Elle, once they get back through the gate, she realises the situation is hopeless, and she goes and stands inside the portal awaiting the explosion of the Hawkins lab. When it does, the Inside Out gets sucked into space, and right at the end, so does she. The Inside Out is gone and normality is resumed. An epilogue by Rockin' Robin, says that the military moved out. There was no reason for them to be in Hawkins anymore. The Upside Down didn't exist anymore, neither did the Abyss, nor did Vecna or anything like that. No reason for them to be there, and off they went. A lot of speculation about the pointlessness of Linda Hamilton's character. Was she there just because she was Linda Hamilton? Up to you. Okay, she's at the stage in life is every appearance she appears in something will be a cameo of some description or another. The second version of it is what Mike suggests at the end, is that it was all an illusion, arranged and planned by Carly and Elle, because Carly has the power of illusion, and so she basically gave Elle the gift of invisibility to let her sneak out the back into the tunnels, where she could speak with Mike and then disappear to wherever and give everybody a sense of hope, which is all very lovely. But points I'd like to point out. Now, this isn't going to be conclusive, because the points I'm going to point out support both theories, none of the theories, one or the other at the same time. Bear with me. So, first thing we'll notice is Millie getting out the back of the truck once they land. Now, if you see what happens immediately after, Mike notices, and so does Hopper, a lot of the signal transmitters, or the speakers, which is a flashback he gets when he's at his graduation ceremony. Now, the speakers were on and at full power, which they probably would have been, knowing Linda Hamilton's eagerness to use them. Then all previous evidence that we've seen meant that Elle would have been on her knees, screaming in pain. She wasn't. She was able to get out the back of the truck, jump down, and then vanish. Let's get back onto that in a minute. The transmitters were indeed pointing from the... I should have written this little down. So you imagine The back of the scenario is the gate into the upside down. In front of those, you've got 3 Humvees with the speakers on top. In front of that, you've got the truck, and in front of that, they got the Humvee that bearded guy whose name I can never remember, and Hopper arrived in. So they were kind of separated. So you've got basically a little circle, and behind that, you've got the Radio Shack, which is where supposedly 11 disappears into. So, in that scenario, you've got 11 here, coming out the back of the truck. Sorry, let's go back a bit. So 11's here, coming out the back of the truck, and then even though the transmitters are on, she gets around the back of them and into the gate. Okay? The other scenario is she goes around the back of the truck into the Radio Shack and into the tunnels and gone. Either way, the problem with that is the speakers are supposed to be on. The transmitter's giving the signal that cripples them. However, where did I've written it down here somewhere. 11 was also shown to have started to resist the effect of the signal when she was desperately trying to reach Kylie and Hopper, and then she did. So maybe she'd managed to withstand the signal. And if you see the footage, so in Mike's scenario, she does appear to be struggling greatly as she gets through the door and into the tunnel. So that is a more realistic interpretation of her current reaction to the signal. But either way, on this scenario, from what we've seen of these signal transmitters, it is a line of sight thing. When you saw Carly, first time we saw Carly in this season, she's up in that little rig and they're all around her pointing at her head. But the biggest clue, somebody has mentioned it, and in my little brain of overthinking things, it's probably the biggest clue one way or the other. So for the time being, if we concentrate on Mike's fantasy version, now this relies on the scenario that Elle and Carly agreed on this plan. But the problem with that plan is the little blue bangle that Hopper originally gave Jane Elle in the early seasons, and it was his daughter Sarah's. Now, after the last conversation between Elle and Carly, it's shown quite explicitly that Elle still has the bangle on her left wrist. In fact, if you see this little scene here, Carly actually runs her little finger over it as they're talking, acknowledging its existence. But if you look at the last image we have of 11 before she vanishes, there's no bangle on that wrist. Now, obviously, after the last conversation between Elle and Carly in the room, Elle went up to the roof to talk with Hopper about how much she's loved his guidance, his respect. He looked after her. He treated her as his daughter, but she wasn't his daughter. And she gives him back the bangle. Carly didn't know that. So the last image that Carly had of 11 before they went their separate ways was her with the bangle. And in the last picture, she very clearly doesn't see it. There's also something to be said about the tattoo. Now, Millie Bonnie Bon Jovi actually has that tattoo. I think she got it done after the 3rd season. Obviously, just after she turned legal age to have a tattoo done. She actually physically has that tattoo. Now, obviously, we couldn't see it in the footage, in the actual episode, because probably screen resolution and the effects that were going on at the time. For the tattoo to have vanished, there's no scenario where that would be a thing, because 11 in any scenario has got that tattoo. Carly knows she has the tattoo. She actually has a tattoo in real life. If they were going to remove it to play with either scenario, that would have to be a conscious decision, either by Carly or the production team. So that is unlikely. I think we just can't see the tattoo. 1, because it's so small, and 2, because she had it done a few years ago and it's faded. Remember, 11 had that tattoo the first time we saw her, and that was 10 years ago, 8 years ago. It's probably faded a bit. Okay, tattoos fade. Look, that was done 21 years ago. That was done 3 months ago. They fade over time. Anyway, so that's that bit. I think, basically, one big thing. So you got the bangle, you got the tattoo, a couple of extra points, Vecna Redemption. I think somebody asked Noah and Millie. Noah and Millie are inseparable. They're like brother and sister. They really are. I think in some cases, Noah might actually have a room at her house even though she's married to John Bon Jovi's son, which blows my mind daily. But they are bestie friends. I think he's godparent to Elle's adopted kid, which is all very lovely. But they were in an interview. The media circus has been monumental. And somebody said, is there any kind of redemption? And Noah said, low-key Vecna. And really gave him these eyes, don't shut the hell up, you know. A bit like Tom Holland spoiling, and Mark Ruffalo spoiling everything for the MCU. What the hell is going on up here? Jesus Christ. Anyway, it's a slight distraction. I am, by the way, living on Cavonia. I am still dying. That other cough linked to licorice flavoured cough syrups are available. So, low-key Vecna, yes, there was that point where Vecna is in his own memory, in the tunnels, and Will's in his mind, and he's figuring out what's going on, and he just sounds exhausted and says, leave me alone.
It wasn't you. It was never you. Leave me alone.
It sounds like he wants it over with, but then he turns and says, I fully embrace what the Mind Flayer was doing. That thing. If you want more explanation, and if you can afford it, I'm going to do another plug here, and it's completely unpaid. There's an app you can get. I don't know if it works overseas. It definitely works here. It's called Today Ticks. I'm going to go see the play again, possibly next week, if I can get the tickets quickly enough. Basically, 10 o'clock every morning, they release a crap load of tickets for West End shows. There is the app, 10 o'clock, sign up, express your interest. 10 o'clock every morning, at least over here, they release a load of tickets, and you've got to be really quick, and you can get them £25, £25, £30, depending on the show, and they're usually pretty good seats. Literally, but you have to be dedicated. You have to want to go that day. Okay, it's not like buy one today, go in 3 days. It's that morning for that day. No questions asked. If you can't do it, don't do it. Anyway, Stranger Things: The First Shadow is the story of how Henry Creel, Vecna, became the thing he became. Lots of jump scares, scary in places. Don't take young children because they will jump at the end, and it's not very nice. However, to get more info about why Henry the way he is, mostly season 4, but definitely a lot of the stage play. So please do. The other scenario I heard, it's all just a Dungeons and Dragons game. I'm very convinced that it's just a gag at the end, because wouldn't it be funny if it was all just a Dungeons and Dragons game? No. It's just a little nod by the Duffer Brothers to the guys, to the scenario, to the world of Dungeons and Dragons, where from all this is born. That's not my opinion. I think it's just a gag. But the big thing, the big one for me to know that what actually happened to Elle is what we saw in the first scenario, is the explosion. Now, this is the second short I put out yesterday morning. Did quite good numbers. Basically, I posted that when the explosion exploded, so did Hawkins' lab. That's where Carly was. And so Carly would have died immediately. And if Carly would have died immediately, the illusion of Elle at the gate would have died immediately at the same time. Would have just vanished before anything had happened. And as you can see, when the explosion happens, it's blink and you'll miss it. Hawkins' lab is vaporised. I shall show you the footage here. And then after that explodes, then you see the school exploding, you see a church ripping apart, and the church is quite near the wall. So everything happens and it radiates out from the centre. Hawkins' lab is established as a centre. It should be noted also, the choice of the B side of Prince's Purple Rain, this is they were suggesting this on Facebook and posts. They were struggling to get the rights to a certain song. There was actually 2 songs. It was When Doves Cry and Purple Rain, the 8-minute B-side album version. That gives them, the whole B-side gives them, I think I did the math, it's 22.5 minutes to get from Hawkins' lab to the gate. Now the gate isn't at the wall, and I don't know how big Hawkins is supposed to be, but if you go on 60 miles an hour, that's 1 mile a minute. 20 minutes gives you 20 minutes gets you 20 miles, something like that. However, they're in a big truck, 30 mile an hour, 20 minutes, whatever. However long it takes, you're doing a mile a minute at 60 mile an hour. 20 minutes gives you 20 miles. It might have only been 5 miles. Plenty of time. But it wasn't about the music. Well, it wasn't about the time. It was about the music. And when the opening chord starts and Elle's having a conversation with Mike, yeah, it worked. Perfect music choice. And I'm glad the Prince Estate. When you say the Prince Estate, you think it's an actual stately home. It's just the people who are looking after his interests. So in the scenario as shown, when the explosion went off on the top of Hawkins' lab went. Hawkins' lab explodes. Carly explodes. Carly's abilities vanish. Elle should have vanished. She didn't. So my estimation, that's Elle. Judging by the damage the explosion caused and the immediate shockwave that radiated out from the centre to destroy the school, the church, and the wall. Plus, if you look behind Elle, you can also see the mushroom cloud behind her, which means that's a pretty big explosion. Hawkins' lab is gone, so is Carly. So is the illusion of Elle. So that's my theory on that one. I did write something down. Generally, be a scenario. I'd love there to be one where everyone lives happily ever after, as if Carly was right. But Carly was right. If Elle had survived and remained in Hawkins with all her friends and her powers, the military would never have left her alone. The Duffer Brothers recently said there was no scenario where Elle was still around in Hawkins if the town was ever going to get back to normal. So she was either going to die or leave. The information given in the footage given allows you to make up your own mind. Personally, I've got my own theory. It's bonkers. It probably doesn't make sense. So after defeating Vecna with Will's help, Elle didn't do it on her own. If Elle was on her own, Vecna would have choked her out. Will stopped him choking her and snapped his arm. She regained her full psychic abilities after Vecna's death, and as a guess, inherited some of Carly's. Possibly. She was standing behind the transmitters so she could still speak to Mike and create the illusion of her own invisibility. At the last moment, she made herself vanish, ran out of the gate before it sealed itself off and became the library again. I know that's a very unlikely, because she would have to have skills she didn't have before. But if we know anything about the end of episode 4, this has been a season for people having skills they haven't had before. Haven't they, Will? So that's just my idea. That's so in either scenario. So in the witness scenario, Elle gets wiped away. In Mike's scenario, it's all an illusion, but the illusion isn't correct. And because of the explosion, the illusion wouldn't have happened anyway, because Carly would have died the second the Hawkins lab exploded. But I like a happy ending. I'd like to think that Eleven's off somewhere in some Norwegian town, Husavik possibly. How she got there, God knows. But it would be nice to think they're all still going, you know. And if some 10 years down the line, when everybody's forgetting, she comes back and it's all a happy ending. We'll have Stranger Things season 6 when the Duffer Brothers run out of money. So that's my plan. That's my idea. Feel free to debate, agree, disagree, posit your own theories. Say what you like. That's just what I think. I'd like to think she's somewhere, but what we saw, either scenario, isn't actually what happened, because there's too much conversion. There's too much in each scenario that cancels each other out and disagrees with each other. Yeah, that's what I've got to say. Thanks very much for watching. Thank you to the Duffer Brothers for making this an amazing journey for the last nearly 10 years. Thank you for this, by the way, this scenario, because there was there's one thing I do like. This is going to be an extra add-on. People making up their own theories. One was a Vecna Redemption. The other one was all a D&D game. The other one was that thing in its original form. We saw it in the first season. But no, that was a poster for the Dark Crystal. That's not to say that's not where they got the idea from. But the second that thing started twitching, more than once I thought, I know what that is, because I don't think we saw the Mind Flayer in season 4. It was a big thing in season 3 because that's what killed Billy. The big meat thing. Was it in season 4? I can't remember. He makes a couple of appearances in the stage play. And there's a whole thing about it in there, and it's mentioned in the last episode about Vecna's journey, why he did the things he did. Yeah, so enough babbling. Thanks very much for watching. I'll probably start again from season 1. I've got a week off. I might be able to do it before I go back to work. You never know. Come up with some more theories to bore you all with. Okay, that'll do. Thanks very much for watching, and bye-bye.